growing up. Elevator systems. Bowen family systems theory in brief for a life of learning. Welcome to a pre-season episode of Elevator Systems. Today we're going to give you a brief introduction to what this podcast is all about and why we think Bowen family systems theory is worth our time and maybe worth your time as well. My name is Dixie Vandersluys. I'm a counselor. I'm a new faculty member of Living Systems Counseling and Training, and I'm the host and creator of Elevator Systems. Katie White is joining me today. She is a marriage and family therapist, and she's also the executive director of Living Systems. And she's agreed to be part of every episode with me this season, and I'm very thankful that you agreed to do that, Katie. So welcome.
Thanks, Dixie. It's been a wonderful journey. I could start us off with what I was so interested when you brought me this idea. What got you started thinking about this idea of a elevator pitch?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, it's come with my, learning about Bowen family systems theory and implementing it into my counseling practice with clients. And how do I present these ideas? How do I think theoretically about them? And I guess I would say for me, one of my joys in life is I love learning and researching. And I thought, Dr. Bowen's family therapy and clinical practice is behind me here, and it's 600 pages plus, I think, plus all the other books that I've read and hours of learning. And I thought I can write a 20-page paper about this, but can I actually say it clearly and accurately, in a short amount of time? So that was the elevator pitch idea as a sort of a starting point, an introduction for people to the theory.
Yeah, I think that's what got me interested. I mean, as people will, if they choose to join us on this journey this season, they'll learn that I can be a bit wordy. So this idea of trying to put some really concrete idea in Bowen family systems theory into a couple sentences seemed really daunting and useful for me to do. And again, our preview is you will watch me throughout the season kind of attempt to do that and probably go over to more 4 or 5 sentences. So it's a work in progress for me.
You're trapped in the elevator a few times, maybe.
I'm not letting people out.
Yeah. Well, the tagline for the podcast is Bowen family systems in brief for a life of learning. And I mean, certainly that's one of the ideas Dr. Bowen observed families in everyday life. Like, this is something that we all experience every day. And it's been very, very useful for me to have these ideas as sort of a framework in my mind as we go into everyday life.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, the format of the show is going to be, there's 3 guests. So Katie and I, and then I wanted people, who had studied the theory for longer or have unique, I guess we all will have unique perspectives, but there'll be 3 people on each episode. We'll each give an elevator pitch. Almost every episode I read from Dr. Bowen's family therapy and clinical practice book. So we get his sort of pitch on the idea. And then we'll look at examples. Each person will talk about what is useful about this idea, and then some takeaways for people, which could be a resource, a question, an idea. So it's pretty, I would say, applicable. You can kind of take it into what you're thinking about
and
your
own
I
appreciate, Dixie, I appreciate what about it is that I think it will be there'll be something here for people who have studied Bowen theory. Maybe they want to debate us and send us an email about ways that they might think different about the pitch of the idea we're talking about. And I think there's also stuff for people who are just interested in a different way of thinking about families and systems, and a different way, I'm a family therapist, a different way of thinking about clinical work. So there's something there, I think, for a lot of different people to just get interested in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in the spirit of the podcast, I thought today we could introduce people to who is Murray Bowen, what is Bowen family systems theory, in 30 seconds or less in an elevator pitch. What a great challenge. Katie, do it.
All right, I'm going to start. I have it. So I put a little bit about the man, Murray Bowen. So I put Murray Bowen was an incredibly curious man. He was born in 1913. And I think if you read about him, you learn he wanted to solve big problems. And he went into medical school. And like many of his time, he went into the war, and the war changed the path of what he was interested in. So originally he was studying cardiology, and then he went on to being curious about mental illness and how people develop symptoms and why some people did and some people didn't. And I think he really focused his theory, and we'll talk about that a lot this season, is how the human is connected to the rest of nature. And as well as kind of looking at the human development through evolution, through time. So how did we end up showing up in the world in the way that we do? And I think that's out of that curiosity. I mean, I think we'll talk about it. He put whole families with a schizophrenic child, young adult, on a unit, which was unheard of in the time. And just studied the way they functioned and learned that there were these predictable patterns about the way that they interacted. And then he, like you said earlier, broadened that into saying, wait a minute, this isn't just showing up in clinical families. This shows up in my family. This shows up in other people's families. This shows up in my trainees' families. So out of these experiments and really his observation came this theory of human behavior. And I think that is what Bowen family systems theory is. It's a way of looking at human behavior, a way of looking at the way that we exist within a system and the way we predictably can respond to others around us. And since his death, other people have taken that on, myself, you, getting interested in studying the theory, getting interested in seeing where it can develop, where it can be pushed in its boundaries. And yeah, there's my not so short pitch.
Yeah. Well, mine was Murray Bowen was a psychiatrist who in the 1950s brought entire families onto a hospital ward and observed how they functioned. When one functioned up or down, what happened in the rest of the family. From this intensive observation and research, he developed a number of concepts that became known as Bowen family systems theory. This theory describes how families and groups respond to stress and adapt to challenges through predictable patterns of behavior. The theory is an effort toward a science of human behavior through careful observation of the family and sees human functioning as having many similarities to other natural systems. And something I'd never thought of really before, my training at Living Systems is how do people research humans? We spend a lot of time on the rats and all sorts of creatures, and what does it actually look like to study humans and humans in context? So, and I guess I wanted to highlight also Catherine Rakow. What is her book called? It's right there. Making Sense of Human Life. And the Murray Bowen archives, I'll put that up in the show notes, but they're great resources for sort of the life history and the development of thought of Dr. Bowen. So, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I thought that's useful to think about the journey of people on this. And I think it's nice to think about this season. You'll hear about bees, and I think
locusts.
Yeah, locusts. And I just connecting the human to other species, because we can watch things, I think, much more neutrally. I mean, that's what I find useful is you can watch things much more neutrally when you're looking in nature than maybe when I'm looking at my own family system, and my objectivity might lessen as I think about the people in my own life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a few other people's pitches for Bowen theory. Dr. Michael Kerr, who took over, I guess it was the Georgetown
Family Center
before that, which then became the Bowen Center in Washington. in his book, Bowen Theory Secrets, he wrote, Bowen was the first to study the family in a live-in setting and describe specific factual details about how families function as systems. Bowen's research was the basis for concluding that the human family is a naturally occurring system. The interactions of family members add up to a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts, which I think is a great systems description. And then I spent a couple weeks ago an entire morning going through many of the books on my shelf here by hand, not PDF, leafing through the indexes and going to all the pages with authors who've written about Bowen Theory. So people like Michael Kerr, Daniel Papireau, Victoria Harrison, Anne McKnight, Bob Noon, Roberta Gilbert, Jenny Brown, still more people, Kathleen Smith, and Ron Richardson. And I typed up, once again by hand, I don't know, because I'm not technological, sort of their brief summaries of who Dr. Bowen is and Bowen family systems theory. And then after all of that, Katie was like, you should throw that into ChatGPT and see what happens, which I had not thought of at all. And I'd never used
using
ChatGPT.
Technology to our advantage here.
Use it for good. Yeah. So, and I don't know if it was shock and awe or shock and chagrin that after my hours of looking through these resources, I didn't realize it's immediate. Like in 3 seconds, it came up with this summary. So give me your thoughts if this captures it pretty well. Bowen family systems theory posits that families function as interconnected systems where each member's behavior and emotions are influenced by and react to others in predictable patterns. This theory emphasizes the importance of understanding the family as a whole, observing family interactions directly, and recognizing that individual behavior is shaped by the broader emotional and relational context within the family systems. And then, Dr. Murray Bowen developed a comprehensive theory of human behavior, focusing on the family as an interconnected emotional system, and revolutionized the study of family dynamics by observing family interactions directly to understand patterns of emotional and relational processes.
Well, there we go.
It did decent.
I think it was a great summary. I'm going to tell future guests they are not, we do want to hear your own thinking. Not the summary through ChatGPT. But I just think that that's a good pulling together many people's thinking about what is this theory. I think that really highlights so many important parts, the interconnectedness, the predictable, the reciprocal, so many good things we'll talk about this season.
Yeah. The observation.
Yeah.
Well, what, Katie, do you find useful to the theory? It's been about 12 years, right, since you have sort of been really.
I think that sounds about right. I learned the theory in my graduate school, and then I really went to studying it when I moved to Australia and had some supervision in my organization around this. But I find it's just so observable. I think the concepts in this theory, at one point, I think I said Michael Kerr makes a statement that Murray Bowen observes these specific patterns of functioning. And I think there's about 4 of them. And he says, is it really this simple? Is it really that there are these few patterns? And people have challenged that what else is out there. And I think I continue to see this in my own family, in my work system, in my clinical cases, and I find it so useful. And I also think I just appreciate that these are observations of the way humans function, of the way animals function, of the way cells function. And I think that to me is really important to just kind of ground me a bit. Mm-hmm. What about you? Mm-hmm. What keeps you around living systems and family? Bowen family system theory.
Well, I mean, I first heard about it in just a marriage and family course in my counseling training about, I think it was maybe 11 years ago. And then at the end of that, and something made so much sense to me. I was a history, one of my undergraduate degrees is in history. And so I've always thought knowing family, knowing history was important, which is different than sort of the biological kind of origins. but it's for certainly something that had piqued my interest at the time. And so I needed a counselor for my last practicum, and I Googled Bowen Theory Canada. And I was living in Manitoba at the time and found Living Systems. And so I got a coach from there and have stayed with that coach for 10 years. And thinking about what's useful, well, I will add, and then 3 years ago or 4 years ago now, I guess, because of the pandemic, when Living Systems training went online, then I could join it from a distance and did the 3-year program. And I guess I've just seen a difference in me, in my ability to kind of calm down.
Yeah.
and a way to think about when life gets stressful or overwhelming. It's a bit of a framework or a map that helps me to see what's going on outside, what's going on inside me. And, don't worry, I'm still quite anxious a number of times. But I would say that's been, it's made a huge difference in my own, sort of daily life.
Yeah. Dixie, I appreciate that.
My husband would agree.
Our family members appreciate it. And I think, you just punched up another thing that I wrote down but didn't say was, I think the other thing that I find really useful as a person in relationships, as a parent, as a partner, but also as a clinician, is thinking about that the focus on self is, really Bowen Theory talks about what do I observe, and then what am I able to do with what I observe. So I think the usefulness of trying to not change other people. I mean, any of you who got on any kind of social media will hear a lot about trying to fix and change the other people in your life, or focusing on the other people that are doing things wrong. And I think really the thing that is useful to me is just thinking through, what can I do with what I'm up against? And really that focus on self it's calming for me.
Yeah. Because I mean, we all know what it's like when someone tries to change us.
Yeah.
And it's not appreciated.
Very true.
Yeah. Well, with a couple minutes left, let's maybe just do sort of a brief introduction of who we are. So I will say, I'm Dixie. I'm a counselor. I have a small private practice in Manitoba. I've lived in every prairie province. I just keep sticking with the prairies, but I've lived in them all throughout my adult life. I'm the wife to a pastor. I've got 3 kids that are all sort of left home and are out in the world now. So that'll be an interesting transition here this coming year. And then Bowen Theory speak, I am a youngest sister of brothers, and actually in my family, both of my parents and my husband only have brothers. So it's I need to do more kind of thinking and research on that, because I think it's a pretty interesting dynamic. So that's me.
I appreciate that. I was thinking that, the first time I learned that about you, my family is much more female heavy on our side. So I am an oldest sister of sisters. I'm a family systems therapist. I was born in the United States and lived there for a long time, did my training there and worked there for a while. And then I lived in Australia and Sydney for a while because I am married to an Australian. And then we moved together over to Canada. So I've been in Vancouver since 2011. I have a small private practice. And then, as Dixie said, I'm the executive director at Living Systems, where I also do some teaching and supervision there. And what else about me? I think I said I was the oldest sister of sisters, right? And that will show up all the time here. I think leadership was not an accident for the oldest sister of sisters.
Right. Yeah. Good. Well, yeah, anything you wanted to add as we finish up this introduction, the trials and joys of working on this season?
I think it's just been a gift. So thank you, Dixie, for putting forth the challenge. I think that, one of the things I really take from Bowen Theory is to try and think about an effort for myself. And I think the effort for myself here has really been to get clearer do my own thinking on these ideas, and how do I get clear on what I see as a parent, as a partner, as a clinician, as a manager, and how these are useful to me. So I appreciate that. And what has been useful to you? I think we said we're recording this intro at the end of our season.
Yeah. Well, certain aspects of the theory have just really begun to make sense, especially the relationship process piece. So how we operate differently based on kind of who's in the room or who we're connected or disconnected with. So that's been helpful. And then in terms of sort of managing my own anxiety and going through these, editing all the closed captioning afterwards. And what I thought was like, oh, Dixie, that was the dumbest thing I've ever heard in the moment when we're recording and my face goes red and these are the Easter eggs. Where does Dixie get anxious? You can see it on my face.
Giving people the tricks, the tips here.
Yeah. And so what, as we're recording, what seems, the end of the world versus, when I've stepped back, when I've looked at the episode as a whole, just it's been fascinating and infuriating. So
theory in action. How do you get more factual? I think, you said something about studying humans. A lot of time human research is done on our own report. We'll take a survey or answer some questions. And it's interesting always for me to learn, how I think I show up versus, if I'm to watch myself on a tape.
Yeah.
Think about that. So this has just been a joy to try this season and have fun.
Yeah. Good. Well, that's our sort of intro to the podcast, and I hope people will join along. You can look for the first episode about systems thinking coming out shortly, and I hope it is a useful elevator ride. Thinking about the theory. This podcast is produced by Living Systems, a nonprofit organization in Vancouver offering counseling and training programs in Bowen family systems theory across Canada.